This is Project Management Paradise.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast, your passport to project success. I'm your host, Aaron Murphy, and today I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast by Steve Kershaw. Steve is the Global Government Defence Leader for PwC. After a 21-year career in the Royal Navy, Steve transitioned to a consulting role in the aerospace and defence sector. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm really good, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. It's the first time I've been on a podcast, so I hope it goes well.
Oh, fantastic. Delighted that the Project Management Paradise podcast is your first podcast to be on. So thank you so much. And Steve, for anyone who might not know you, maybe you could tell us about yourself and your background, and how did you go from serving in the Royal Navy to becoming a global defence leader?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't think any of it was particularly planned, which is probably not what you want to hear on a program management podcast. So I was born and raised in Manchester. I'm a Manchester City fan, so born just outside the city. Did my A levels in maths, physics, and chemistry, and wanted to do a degree in engineering. Looked around, and I think the best place I found really was joining the Royal Navy as an officer. So I did my Admiralty interview board, got a place at Dartmouth, and joined the Navy. I then did a year of my sort of basic officer training. So you go to Dartmouth, then you go to sea, then you go back to Dartmouth, then you go back to sea again, and then I joined the Royal Naval Engineering College, which is where engineering students did their engineering degrees in the Navy. Did a 3-year engineering degree. And in the third year of that, I decided to become a weapon engineer officer on submarines for reasons that we can go into if you like. And then I started my submarine training, which took about another year or so. And then I joined my first submarine. I was active on submarines for about 12 years or so. And then I started to work in procurement in Bristol, where the Defence Procurement Agency, which became Defence Equipment and Support, is based. Got into leading programs, and I was the integrated project team leader for the Royal Navy's gunnery and electronic warfare program. So I was responsible for the procurement, support, safety of all of those systems. And then I left, and I decided that consulting was the profession that I should follow. And I've worked my way up the greasy pole from there on. I made partner at PwC about 10 years ago. And I've worked in the defence sector all my time as a consultant. And about 18 months ago, I took over from one of my Australian colleagues who was retiring as PwC's Global Government Defence Leader. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Amazing. I don't think I've ever had anyone on the podcast or even spoke to anyone outside of the podcast who has worked in a submarine. For anyone who might not know what that's like, maybe you could tell us a bit about what it's like to actually live and work in a submarine. I'd imagine it's very different to being on the surface.
Yeah, it's a strange way to make a living, but very rewarding. I certainly found it very rewarding. So I was on both nuclear submarines and a diesel submarine. I was on our last ever diesel submarine, which is now still in service with the Canadian Navy, but mainly on nuclear submarines based out of Plymouth. So mainly the Trafalgar class for those that know these things. And you would probably go on a deployment or a patrol for probably average 8 to 10 weeks. I think the longest I did any one stretch was 13 weeks. And the longest I did away from home was probably about 7 months when we did a patrol and a trip all into the Red Sea, the Gulf, down to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, and then back to the UK again. And for most of that time, you're living on board, apart from when you go alongside on a port visit. And you work generally in 2 watches. So you do 6 hours on, 6 hours off for the whole time that you're underwater, which it gets pretty tiring after a while, but you're pretty busy. So when you're on watch, certainly as a weapon engineer officer, I used to, one of the reasons why I wanted to join submarines is you're an active member of the operation of the submarine. So you go on the periscope, you go on you do the navigation, You're on ship control, where you're responsible for effectively flying the submarine, its depth, its speed, taking any emergency procedures if you get a flood or a fire or a high pressure airburst or a hydraulic leak or whatever. And then you fire all of the weapons as well. So it's a sort of really hands-on program. And then when you're not on watch, in your 12 hours off, you've got to eat, you've got to do paperwork, you've got to recreate, you do exercise for people that do exercise, and you've got to sleep. So it's a busy old time.
Amazing. So you're always kept busy anyway, even
Yeah.
underwater. And you mentioned about exercise. What was that like in a submarine? I'd say it's different than surface again.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean there were only, I mean certainly the ones I was on, there were like three main ways of doing exercise. So there was an exercise bike. There was some weights. You have to be quite careful with weights because submarines have to be very stealthy. You don't want anybody detecting anything. And UK submarines, we spend a lot of money on making them effectively as silent as possible. So what you don't want is somebody like throwing weights around and throwing them on the sort of metal deck and making a noise. So you have like rubber weights and rubber matting, and all submariners have it drilled into them. You've got to be quiet. So weights was one. The one I used to do was, there's a rowing machine on board. I now have a sort of like Pavlovian reaction to rowing machines. I can't go on them anymore because that's what I used to spend all my time on. And because you work this 6 hours on, 6 hours off sort of shift rotation, basically you either get up early or you go to bed late because you can't go on the rowing machine when you're on watch. You're going to do it when you're off watch. So what I used to do is I used to get shaken early, and then I'd go up the ladder I used to share a cabin with the first lieutenant when I was the head of the weapon engineering department. Turn right past the captain's cabin, and then you go through the reactor tunnel, which actually goes through the reactor compartment. It's got a really big hydraulic door in it, so you pull the handle and it goes and open the door, and then you'd shut the door behind you, and then you walk over the reactor, and then you go to the other side and you open the door and shut it behind you, and then you go into the row machine was in the switchboard room, which was underneath the maneuvering room where they have all the control panels for all of the reactor and all the systems. So and you had to book the row machine a bit like a squash court. You had to put your name down for it at a particular time. So I go down to the sort of like concept 2 rower, and it was in between two big switchboards, which is where all the electrical power generated by the submarine was routed through to all of the various pumps and stuff. So there's like, hundreds of thousands of volts going through these 2 switchboards, and in the middle was a concept 2 rower, and you strap yourself to it and off you went, start rowing. Sometimes when you're on the rower, we come up to periscope depth, so they put a 10-degree bow up angle on, and you'd end up rowing uphill, which even Sir Stephen Redgrave doesn't do that. So that was exercise. It's an interesting experience.
Yeah, I'd imagine you'd have to even control like pulling your elbows in case you hit off the machines.
Yeah.
That's something else. And just to kind of transition to your consultant work in program management,
Yeah.
over the course of your career, what are some of the biggest changes you've noticed in program management?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, when I first started being an engineer on a submarine, when you came alongside, you had to do all of the maintenance, defect repair, etc. That was actually quite a big project to manage. You imagine you've got a reactor, you've got explosives, you've got buoyancy, you've got to maintain. There's a lot going on. You might have to take periscopes out. And all of these are fairly significant events. And we used to, back in the day, this is before like people had laptops, if you can even conceive of that. Never mind mobile phones. I remember being on board as a lieutenant, and somebody brought down the first ever laptop. This is in the sort of like early 90s. So we actually used to manage the project of a maintenance period alongside, basically on big bits of graph paper. It was literally like written down, and it was pretty effective, really. Like every day, it'd look a bit like Microsoft Project with different streams of activities, and you'd have different dependencies, and you'd go along and go, well, I can't do that on that day because this is happening, and I know that those two things are in conflict. So yeah, that's how we used to do it. Now, of course, over the years, lots of digital tools have come along. And I think that's probably the biggest shift. The complexity and capability of digital tools, like Cora, for example, has come on leaps and bounds. I mean, I first started, have a relationship with Cora probably 5 or 6 years ago, and that's developed significantly even since then. So you imagine what it was like, back in the day, and then you got things like rudimentary project management tools with Gantt charts that you could put in the start and stop dates and put any dependencies to it, and print it all out on a big bits of paper. So that was a big leap forward. I think the other one that I would call out is professionalization of project management. It's a bit like engineering. Everybody can call themselves an engineer. You get plumbers, but I think it's plumbers, but calling themselves heating engineers, for example. A professional engineer that's gone through some kind of qualifications or some accreditation from an engineering authority, such as the Institute of Engineering Technology, which I'm a member of. They've done that for program management. So if I go back 20 years, people didn't really do program management accreditation. Now there's you can be a member of the Association of Project Management, for example. There's lots of qualifications you can do in managing successful programs and Prince 2. And they were all kind of in their infancy when I was growing up in the Navy. And I think that's a big step forward now. So if you're a client of PwC or of Cora, or you want to buy in some management, some project management expertise, you can actually be pretty assured now that by looking at somebody's qualifications and accreditation, what you're going to get. And that certainly wasn't the case if you go back 10 or 15 years even.
I'd say they would probably take people from just any kind of general area that probably has familiarity with like certain areas, and then ask them to be in those roles. So they sort of adopted the titles of these program managers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you mentioned how going from like the analog systems into a digitized system. So what has been maybe some of the primary challenges you faced when digitizing program development?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people use this term digitization. I mean, most things are digitized these days. We go into an organization to look at their program management or a program or a portfolio. It's very rare that you actually find somebody's got, oh, hang on, it's in a cupboard. And you open the cupboard and it's on paper. It's usually on a system somewhere. So pretty much everything is what I would call digitized, i.e. exists in some kind of digital format somewhere. The biggest challenge, and there's lots of tools that overcome this now, a bit like Cora does, is linking it all up into a common picture. Because, again, what we often find is organizations have this sort of accretion of digital tools. It might be a spreadsheet that was built by Bob that people have started using because it's really good and helpful. It might be different ERP systems. It might be another digital system as well. And one of the challenges is just getting all of that together in one place in a sort of common taxonomy and format so that you can actually see what's going on. So joining up all of the data into a common picture. The ability to do that, as I think, has developed massively over the last 5 years, I think. So most organizations have some form of capability in that area, but there's always more that you can do. I mean, you don't want to sort of boil the ocean, but I think that, and join absolutely everything up. I think you have to be very focused on what am I trying to achieve here and what data do I need in order to do that. But I think the joining up data sets, cleansing data, forming a common picture is something that is becoming more and more straightforward. And I think that's a good move.
Absolutely. And having one centralized system to have all this information stored is key, essentially.
Yeah, and I think and the reason that's the case is if you're working in an organization and somebody comes along and goes, oh, we're going to give you a central data system, that some people, and I don't blame them for doing this, is like, great, another system. But actually what you have to do in order to get people to adopt it properly and use it is to actually retire the other system. So you're making their job easier, not giving them another system to use on top of the ones that they already have to use. I think that's key. So having like a control tower or mission control, as people call it, where actually you can get all of your data and information needs through one portal, if you like, is really important. Because if you do that, then people will use it. But if it's just another thing, then what we find is that people don't.
Exactly. Having more programs on board and having people to learn and develop skills using each individual program is probably a
Yeah.
difficult task, whereas having that one centralized system streamlines the whole process.
Yes.
And from your experience, is ROI an important factor in transformation programs?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the so benefits is one of the things I'm particularly focused on in some of the work that I do in defence, both in the UK and globally. Um, it's it's all too often, unfortunately, what I see is that a project is or a program is launched, and in the business case for it will be some benefits, and obviously, otherwise, people don't spend money on it. But I think the way in which those benefits are sort of formalized and locked in, monitored and managed sometimes can be a lot better. Um, and over time, when budgets change and projects get rebaselined and requirements might change, etc., you can lose the thread of what were the original benefits for this, and where am I in the course of delivering them. And a lot of projects and programs start to develop a life of their own. We're gonna deliver this one, um, whether or not it's delivering the benefits that were originally set out to do so. And that might be the right thing to do, but you need the governance around it that says, is this still worth it? One of the things I see quite a bit is one of the hardest things to do in program management is actually stop a program. And yeah, there's good reasons for that. One, there might be like a lot of sunk cost into it. There's a lot of people personally invested into a program. And that can be quite difficult news when you actually go to a bunch of people who've been living and breathing it, try the hardest to make it successful, and saying, we're going to stop this. I can understand why organizations take that, find it difficult to do that. I think this thing about benefits and ROI is particularly important when you look at it from a portfolio perspective. So when you look at it organizational wide or enterprise wide, how does an organization keep track of all of the programs and projects that are supposed to be delivering benefits? Now, whether that's an ROI in a business sense, you might be growing the top line, or you might be growing revenue or market share, or is it like pounds and pence? So you're actually done this thing as an efficiency program to save money. What I see quite often is what I call the benefit infrastructure is sometimes either missing or it's not done very well. By which it's on a few spreadsheets. You might get a report to the board, but if you sort of say to the board, where are you in your program benefit delivery? Which projects are going to deliver when? How much benefit are they going to deliver, and how does that compare to what they originally set out to do? That's quite a difficult picture to find in some organizations. But if you do it well and you do it properly and you've got all this management information, you get lots of other useful information, like how long is it taking me to get a project from initiation through to delivering benefits on average? So you start to develop your own benchmarks and parameters for your organization that you can then use to get more of an estimate on when am I likely to get benefits and when. And that gives you information on, well, hang on a minute, this project not delivering the benefits is costing more. Can I fix it? Or do I need to stop it? Do I need to replace it with something else? So I think it's really crucial. That bit of program management, the ROI and benefits, is really crucial. And it's not something I see done uniformly well, unfortunately.
So you're saying to have these milestones in place so that you're constantly tracking the progress, whether to continue with the project or once it's missed, just say 2 or 3 of these key milestones that, okay, it's time that we put a hold on this and figure out where we're going wrong.
Yeah, but also for an organization that might have 300 programs running, to know at any moment, where am I? What is going to deliver and when, and what management interventions do I need to make potentially to get to where I want to go. So it's really important that you have all of that information building up into a common picture.
Absolutely. And having the ability to access that at any time is probably very crucial.
Yeah.
So you previously touched on how you've used the Cora platform for program management. What benefits have PwC enjoyed from using the Cora platform, or some of the benefits you've enjoyed yourself from using it?
Yeah. Well, we use Cora both in the US and we've used it in the UK, both for internal use and also with clients. Um, I think so one thing is, I spoke earlier about being able to join up different information sources. So that's one of the benefits. There is a benefits management tool built into the platform. So as I mentioned, that's obviously useful. I suppose the other bit that I would bring out is sometimes program management platforms can be, you need to be reasonably expert in being able to use them, but also be able to tailor them for a particular circumstance. I think, platforms such as Cora, which are sort of low code, no code, to where actually an organization can upskill itself and start to do that itself is quite important. If you always have to go back to what can be an expensive sort of help desk in order to get minor changes made, then that is not ideal, because it can be really expensive to make what can be quite small changes but important changes to your system. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen over time is a lot of platform providers such as yourself have gone to this low code, no code regime for exactly that reason. But it's something that I've seen Cora do.
Adapting to the customer's needs rather than trying to get the customer to fit one size fits all
Yeah.
nearly. And in the aerospace and defense sector, what has been the impact of digitization? And can you provide a few examples?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would call two out. So one is the sort of advent of digital twins, which over the last 5 years I've seen those be adopted much more widely. And personally, I think they're really good and essential for an organisation to properly manage and control a very complex environment and program. Because when things get really complicated, it's very difficult for somebody to carry it around in their head. And the interactions between different elements, whether it's supply chain, transport, the physical infrastructure, technology, the actual physical process of manufacturing something, the support arrangements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Getting all of that twinned digitally so that you've got a good feel for what is this program doing, but also what will it do if I do certain things to it. If I speed up the supply chain, for example, if I put more people in and put double shifts on something, what is that going to do to the output? These are all really important but difficult questions to answer in practice. And I think digital twins can really help to do that. So I've seen those be adopted, really well. I mean, some of the work that we're doing in the UK submarine enterprise, for example, there's a lot of digitization of all of that information and bringing out real insights from data that already exists. So that's one I would call out. The other one in aerospace and defense is it's really quite rare these days to have one company or organization delivering a really complicated product like a submarine or an aircraft or a ship or a tank. They're often, if they're not partnered with another firm in the UK, then they're almost certainly partnered with somebody from a different country, because a lot of these big programs are so expensive and complicated. They're actually done by multi-nations. So if you look at the F-35 fighter program, which is probably the biggest defense program globally, obviously it's in the US, but there are partner nations like the UK, build some of the aircraft, for example. The support arrangements are distributed globally. that requires a lot of cooperation across national territories. There's another program which the UK is developing called GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program, which is the UK, Italy, and Japan. And designing an aircraft of that complexity, a sixth generation fighter across national territories, requires you to share data at a classification that is, doesn't lend itself at the moment to sort of public networks. So that is a complication that other industries arguably don't have. Getting over that is is a key challenge, which the things like cloud, etc., can really help with if it's secured in the right way. So that's the sort of second area where I think aerospace and defence in the digital era can really benefit from being able to share data securely across different organisations and different nationalities.
Especially as you just touched on there, like ensuring that encrypted information stays safe. I can imagine in the aerospace and defense industry is a major, major thing.
Exactly.
In your opinion, what big changes do you see impacting the aerospace and defense industry when it comes to digitization?
Yeah, I think the key changes are already underway. So the ones I just mentioned, digital twinning, the digitization and use of data, use of cloud, I think are the ones that I would point to in the next the next 3 to 5 years. I suppose the one that is on everybody's mind is AI and how that can play into this space. I actually listened to one of your previous podcasts, Aaron, where you had a professor from university who specialised in AI, and you asked him the question, what's going to happen in AI in the next 3 to 5 years? I was really struck by his answer because he said, I don't know. It's moving so fast that it's actually impossible to predict. If you look at how it's come on in the last year, for example, what's it going to do in the next 3 years? It's quite difficult to understand the trajectory of it. But I think that we can already see that the use of AI in programs has potentially some really significant benefits. Whenever I've been brought in to look at a program that might be in trouble, try and fix it, help it, or get it started properly, I've always been struck that the data that's pointing to the problem that's causing the issue exists, but it might not be knowable, it might not be known, it might not be visible. Actually, most of the time it is. It's just not being brought out in the right way. If you can get AI to start crawling over data and teach it, what issues look like, right down in the really detailed level, and they can then start to flag up, we think there's a problem here. That can be an immensely powerful program management tool. I mean, people are already doing that. But I think that there's something that there's another bit of AI, and this is just my own personal thought that I think is important, which is not artificial intelligence, it's actual intelligence. How do people like you and me apply our actual intelligence to programs supported by AI? And I think if an AI can help us to distill all of that data that exists and give us a really succinct, easily digestible view of a really complicated program, this is what's doing well, this is what's not going so well, I think that's extremely powerful. And it allows us to take more action rather than looking for the data, which is what a lot of people spend their time doing and building reports to show to leaders. If that's all done for you, obviously you have to check it, make sure it's correct, etc. And there's no hallucinations in there and all the rest of it. But I think it could be an extremely powerful tool, and I'm looking forward to what it can do in the program management space. I think the potential is massive.
Exactly, and I suppose having the correct prompts or the correct information to feed the AI system will really accelerate all of this. So it will free up a lot of time for program managers, project managers, to just have to basically review the information, and they don't have to be responsive to the situations as they occur. They can plan for these in advance. So that will be very beneficial.
Yeah, provided they've got actual intelligence.
Not just a random chat
That's
GPT
important.
information.
Yeah.
And Steve, we have this reoccurring segment on the podcast where we ask this one question to all our guests, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answer. But what has been the most important piece of advice you've received, and how has it helped you in your career?
Yeah. So the most important piece of advice I got was from a boss I used to work for, and it was don't hide things. This is particularly important in programs. I think that there can be sometimes a culture of I'm going to get this program delivered. I understand why. I did that as well when I was a program manager. It's like, particularly in the military, where it's like we want you to take that hill, so you're going to take the hill. You know, even literally, even if you die doing it. So you get, I want you to deliver this program. I am going to deliver this program. Sometimes what I've seen is that can lead to a sort of blinkered approach where when things are going wrong, you don't really want to tell people, and because you think you can fix them and they don't need to know, I can overcome it, I'm going to get there. I think that generally doesn't doesn't lead to a good outcome. The best thing to do, in my view, is to be open and transparent about where your program is. That way you can get the help. That way an organization can take the right decision about, do I need to intervene? Do I need to stop it? But hiding things generally is not a sensible move. And unfortunately, I think human nature tends to be that, well, I might be able to fix this, so I'm not going to tell anyone. I mean, you have to use your judgment about when do you declare that something is going wrong or you're concerned about it, rather than keep going, oh God, that's gone wrong, that's gone wrong. But that was a lesson that I learned, and I think it's a good one. And I've always approached that with I think when I'm leading a program or delivering something, the people that I'm working for trust me that if something is going wrong, I'm going to tell them because it's important that they know.
Amazing. That's really, really powerful. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to hearing your panel discussion next week at the Farnborough International Air Show. And if anyone is interested in getting in touch with you to hear more about your experience, maybe even to hear this discussion that's going to be taking place, where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best thing to do. Drop me a message and I'll respond.
Amazing. And I'll make sure to include a link to your LinkedIn in our show notes. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Nice to meet you, Aaron. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Project Management Paradise podcast at projectmanagementparadise.com. Links mentioned during the episode, including speaker profile details and other resources, are available in the podcast description and on projectmanagementparadise.com, where you can also download or stream all our episodes to date.